That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Alright guys, in this video I'm going to talk about every single big riser that we saw from week 1. I think that I'm going to define big riser as guys that are going to see their fantasy football trade value drastically increase as they look to have a lot more fantasy production scored in 2020 than we originally projected. Not necessarily am I going to think that every single one of these guys is a good buy high, because if you go out there and you try to trade them, you are definitely going to be paying a premium. Like I saw a bunch of people say, oh, should I go out there and try to trade Austin Eckler for Josh Jacobs? I took Austin Eckler ahead of Josh Jacobs in my fantasy football draft. Guys, I mean, yeah, if you could, you would, but you're not going to be able to. I mean, the values have changed. These guys are going to cost different prices. They are going to cost more than they did during your fantasy football draft. So I'm going to list off the top guys that saw their value increase. Some of these guys that you are going to be able to find on your waiver wire, and you can go out there and make priority claims for them. But regardless, I am also going to give you whether I think that you should go out there and buy, or perhaps maybe even sell high. So the first guy, Jonathan Taylor. Now, obviously, he is by far the biggest riser in week 1 due to the fact that Marlon Mack went out there, suffered a season-ending injury. At least the last I read, that's what it looks like it will be. And so many great things are about this Jonathan Taylor profile, and I just recorded a video where I broke it down in depth. Make sure you go out and watch that video after you're done with this one, and I think that you're going to find a lot of useful information there, and I really don't want to break it down any more than this, but I will give a little just quick summary. Jonathan Taylor is an Ezekiel Elliott-sized running back with Saquon Barkley level athleticism, and he went out there and caught 6 balls for 68 yards in week 1. I mean, he is everything that we are looking for. The only thing is maybe his offense isn't something that we are really trying to attack. But regardless, Jonathan Taylor is going to see his fantasy football value drastically increase. And I think that if you play in a casual fantasy football league, maybe you're watching this video and you just play with some buddies from high school, that's a league that you can actually go out there and buy Jonathan Taylor. I mean, and you are going to have to pay a little bit more than where he went in your fantasy football draft. But I think that maybe your league mates won't necessarily value him where he currently should be. But I mean, if you play in a league where guys know what they're doing, I mean, if it's a $100 buy-in league or more, most likely, I mean, that guy who owns Jonathan Taylor drafted him for a reason and is not going to be willing to part away from him for anything less than a treasure chest full of fantasy assets. Now, the next player, real quick, we're just going to talk about Nyheim Hines. Nyheim Hines went out there and scored 2 touchdowns in week 1, but that's not why we see his value increase. I was just a little bit worried about Nyheim Hines in terms of if he was actually going to go out there and get the receiving work. I know a lot of people talked about Marlon Mack and Jonathan Taylor just splitting this backfield down the middle, as both running backs can catch the ball. It's not necessarily their strengths, but I mean, they don't have to get taken off the field for it. And right away, even before the Marlon Mack injury, we actually see Nyheim Hines in the game. I mean, he scored a touchdown before Marlon Mack even left, and he was being used in the receiving game. This is a player that you can go out there and you can find on your waiver wire in a ton of fantasy football leagues. And what's most exciting about Nyheim Hines week 1, besides the fact that he's going to go out there and get more opportunity without Marlon Mack in town, is that he actually logged 8 receptions. And if we see Phillip Rivers continue to check the ball down, similar to what he did in San Diego with both Austin Eckler, I mean, just throughout his entire career, including guys like Danny Woodhead, I think that Nyheim Hines can actually be a running back 2 down the stretch. And if you can get that production off the waiver wire, I mean, that is gold. So the next player is a guy that you are going to have to go out there, and I think that you are going to have to trade for, and I am actually buying this player high. I didn't draft him a ton in fantasy football in 2020 just because there were so many mouths to feed in his offense, but we just saw one go down. We saw him get used very often in a role that is extremely appealing for fantasy football, and this is CeeDee Lamb. So, yes, Blake Jarwin went down. Last I read, it looks like he is going to be out for the year. And I know some people are saying, Mason, you're an idiot. Blake Jarwin plays the tight end position. How is this helping CeeDee Lamb, who is a prototypical wide receiver? And I'm saying that CeeDee Lamb and Blake Jarwin were both going to operate in very similar areas of the football field, and there's nothing really behind Blake Jarwin. So what this Dallas Cowboys offense is going to look like from here on out is, instead of running a personnel with a tight end, maybe they just have to go out there and they have to go small and they have to throw as many wide receivers on the field as possible, because their depth at that position is very much lacking. And this is just going to open up more routes for CeeDee Lamb to run. This is going to open up more targets for CeeDee Lamb to accumulate. And week 1, right away, I mean, no preseason, a shortened training camp, the rookie was able to go out there and get 5 receptions for 59 yards. I mean, that is extremely impressive for week 1. The reason I avoided him is just because I thought that we were going to be able to go out there and potentially buy him 4 or 5 weeks later for slightly of a discount, especially in redraft leagues. I thought there was going to be a chance that he was actually dropped before we see his massive breakout. But I mean, I think that we can see CeeDee Lamb break out as soon as next week. I mean, I'm just going to have to take the loss here. I'm going to have to go out there and I'm going to have to buy him high before his value even takes that next step forward. So this next situation, I'm going to try to talk about a winner and a loser, because these two guys are tied directly together. And this is J.K. Dobbins and Mark Ingram. So yes, I know the story of the day was that Mark Ingram was not the guy that got the goal line work, not the guy that got the touchdowns, and that was J.K. Dobbins, who got 2 of them. But what I'm more interested in is the total carry number between these two running backs. I don't know why I'm stumbling over my words here. And also the fact that Mark Ingram only got 2.9 yards per carry in an offense that was extremely efficient against a soft defense in week 1. So I think that this could signify the fact that Mark Ingram is losing a step as he's getting extremely old for the running back position at the NFL level, and he has had a ton of carries over his entire career. And if this Baltimore Ravens offense is already in week 1, like I said, no preseason, a shortened training camp, willing to give the rookie the goal line work, willing to split this backfield almost 50-50, I think that J.K. Dobbins is going to take over as the feature running back sooner rather than later. And like CeeDee Lamb, I think that he is also a guy that we can go out there and we can find a way to trade high for. Maybe even if you have to trade a little bit more than where he was drafted in your startup draft or in your just regular fantasy draft, I think it could pay dividends down the road if J.K. Dobbins is the clear running back 1 in this backfield, which I knew was going to happen, but I thought it was going to happen around weeks 8, 9, or 10. But I think that now we are looking at it happening around weeks 3, 4, or 5. And if that happens, I mean, J.K. Dobbins is going to be a league winner. Now, the next player is a player that I actually drafted everywhere in fantasy football, dating all the way back to earlier this offseason, and I begged y'all to go out there and value him higher. I begged y'all to go out there and try to draft him, and this is Calvin Ridley. So Calvin Ridley goes and shows that he is a stud wide receiver. He's stepping up right next to Julio Jones as a 1A, 1B, not necessarily as the wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2. And yes, this was a shootout, but my argument is that I think that we can see a ton of Atlanta Falcons games get out of control in the 2020. And I think that we can actually see Calvin Ridley consistently get this volume, logging 9 receptions, 130 yards, and 2 touchdowns, because this Atlanta Falcons defense is bad. So why are we going to expect the Atlanta Falcons defense to try to avoid shootouts in 2020? Go get Calvin Ridley. Maybe not in this week. Maybe you wait a week and see just the buzz dimmer down a little bit. But I think that Calvin Ridley has taken that next step. And obviously, I mean, Russell Gage even got a ton of work in this game where maybe he's not going to get that in the future. So even if Matt Ryan throws for less yards, I think that we can still see Calvin Ridley have that week-to-week 100-yard upside, regardless of if the matchup is going to be a shootout or not. Now, let's talk about one player that I avoided in fantasy football in 2020, and he's going to cost me a ton of money. But regardless, I have to be objective here. I have to talk about the guys that went out there and really impressed in week 1. And I think that maybe my thesis that these players that were switching offenses were going to start slow in 2020 is just looking wrong, as we see DeAndre Hopkins go out there, 14 receptions, 151 yards. Week 1 with Kyler Murray. He was not even practicing that much this offseason due to him going out there and secretly really wanting that contract extension. And I thought that we were going to see this Cliff Kingsbury offense really want to spread the ball around to all of their playmakers, give the ball a little bit to Kenyon Drake, give the ball a little bit to Christian Kirk, give it a little bit to DeAndre Hopkins. But the real game plan is give the ball a lot to DeAndre Hopkins, and who cares who else sees the ball? And clearly, DeAndre Hopkins, I mean, this is not even his ceiling from a week-to-week perspective, as he did not even find the end zone. So just imagine, yes, if DeAndre Hopkins loses 50 yards and a couple of receptions, but as long as he gets a touchdown, he's right in this range of scoring anywhere from 25 to 30 points in any given week. And that's a player that you are going to want to plug in every single time. I mean, this was a horrible matchup for DeAndre Hopkins, who had to go against the San Francisco 49ers, and this was his first week with Kyler Murray. He's only going to get a better chemistry with Kyler Murray, and he's only going to get better matchups from here on out. I mean, DeAndre Hopkins is looking like a guy that could easily outscore Michael Thomas in 2020. Now, the last player I'm going to talk about is a guy that you can go out there and get off your waiver wire, and I'm going to keep it brief because I did talk about him a ton in the waiver wire video that dropped earlier yesterday or today. I don't know when I'm necessarily going to release this specific video, but this is Robbie Anderson. So Robbie Anderson went out there and logged 6 receptions for 115 yards and a touchdown against the Las Vegas Raiders, which this game kind of got out of hand and was a shootout. And similar to the Atlanta Falcons situation, I expect this to happen very often. Basically, I truly believe that this Carolina Panthers defense is the worst defense in the NFL. I said that before week 1. That's why I told you all to go out there and play all the Henry Ruggs that you could. And really, everything that we saw in week 1 confirmed that. I think that this Carolina Panthers team is going to be playing from behind a lot. They're going to be having to try to keep up with the opposing offense, and I mean, they have a decent offense themselves. So Robbie Anderson is a guy that definitely has wide receiver 2 upside and maybe even a wide receiver 3 floor down the stretch. Definitely has flex appeal in fantasy football, and a guy that you can get off your waiver wire is going to be worth that. Now, thanks guys. I really hope y'all enjoyed the video. I really hope y'all got something from it. As always, if you did, make sure you drop a like and make sure you subscribe.